I'm Helen Thomas, communications expert at the Next Genius Foundation. And today we have Patricia Hunt with us from Juniata College to talk about pre-med and healthcare majors in the US. Let me start off by giving a brief introduction of Patricia. Patricia Hunt became the director of the Health Professions Program at Juniata College in June 2020, having previously worked as a pre-health advisor at the Pennsylvania State University for the previous 6 years. She began her career in academic advising in the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State in 2007 and has been working in areas of education, engineering, and forensic science. She holds a baccalaureate degree in meteorology and a master's degree in entomology with a concentration in forensic science, both from Penn State. She is active in both the National Academic Advising Association and the National Association of Advisors in the Health Profession. Welcome to Next Genius webinars, ma'am.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Sorry to interrupt, but before we begin the session, I have two reminders for all the participants out here. So the first reminder is that all the sessions will be recorded and it will be uploaded on YouTube as a part of the Study Medicine Abroad playlist. There is also a live YouTube streaming of all the sessions that we are doing on all the sessions that we're conducting on Study Medicine Abroad. The second thing is there will be a live Q&A session towards the end, and you can post all the doubts and queries related to this session that we are having with Patricia, ma'am. So go ahead and ask your doubts and queries during the session, or you can post your doubts and queries towards the end. And with that, let's begin the session, ma'am. It's over to you. You can share your presentation and
okay, great.
You can take it ahead.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah, please.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to our session on medical education in the United States. My name is Patricia Hunt and I am the director of the Health Professions Program here at Juniata College. International applicants to U.S. medical schools have to be considerate of some of the aspects of the application process. In this presentation, I will discuss some of the challenges faced by international applicants, alternative pathways in healthcare and science, and how to best prepare and use some best practices when you're preparing an application for medical school and beyond. First, and probably the biggest challenge to international applicants to U.S. medical schools comes in the area of finances. Many medical schools require international students to have money in what's considered an escrow account to cover both tuition and possibly cost of living expenses prior to you starting medical school. And the reason for this is there is a lack of funding available for international students in the forms of grants and federal and government-sponsored loans. Therefore, students need to recognize the need for finances as they begin to prepare for the process of applying to medical school. The amounts range from school to school. Some schools only require 1 full year of tuition and cost of living expenses upfront. However, there are some schools that will require all 4 years of tuition and fees upfront. Options then, so because there's very limited federal funding available to non-US citizens, some of the options available to international students include private bank loans, but for those, typically international students are going to need a cosigner. So some family member to co-sign the loan for them. Some students are able to get loans from their home country and their home government. Usually those that do tend to have a requirement associated with them that the student, if your government is going to pay for your medical school or help subsidize your medical school tuition, they will often require you to come back to the home country and practice for a certain amount of time. There are scholarships available for international students. They are highly limited. They do tend to be merit-based, and typically given after the first year of medical school. However, those will most likely not cover all of your expenses. Challenge number 2 is related to getting accepted into medical school in the first place. There are 2 funding structures for medical school in the United States. There's public schools and there's private schools. Public medical schools receive money from their state governments to cover some of their costs. In return, these schools' primary mission is typically to serve the population of their state. And so that usually comes with strings attached on the medical school, where a certain percentage of their incoming classes have to be state residents. For example, the Michigan State University School of Osteopathic Medicine is actually, in order to receive their state funding, must maintain 90% of their class as Michigan residents in order to maintain their state funding. So they have a class of about 200 students every year entering medical school. So because of that 90% requirement of Michigan residents, there are only 20 spaces for students who live outside of the state of Michigan. The other funding structure is private. Private medical schools do not depend on state funding, and therefore they can be more liberal in where they accept students from. Typically, private schools are much more international friendly. However, they do tend to come with a higher price tag. An additional barrier to acceptance are issues with visas and how the medical residency program in the United States is run. The visa issue can come into play as some countries require their students to return back to their home country and then reapply for the visa, as they have to convert it from a student visa over to an employment visa. Because as you participate in the residency program, that becomes an employment and a job versus a student sort of category. And depending on the political climate, both abroad and here in the United States, that can sometimes be tricky. And so sometimes medical schools tend to be very conservative. And so sometimes it's just not an arena that they want to really get too heavily involved in. Additionally, the US residency program is funded by US taxpayer dollars. So again, a political environment exists that causes some tension. However, there are some privately funded residency programs that hospitals sponsor themselves, and those are very those private residency placements don't have the US federal dollars attached to them, and so the hospitals are paying for them themselves, and so it's more to the hospital's discretion about who they want to hire in those positions, and they tend to be very international friendly. So there's 2 sort of very significant barriers that international students face, but that doesn't mean that international students don't receive medical education in the United States. And so one of the ways that one of the paths that international students will take is applying to medical school via an MD Ph.D. program. These programs combine a medical school education with a research-based academic doctoral program. These programs typically are longer. They take about 7 years to complete after completing your undergraduate education. However, international students can be successful as PhD programs typically provide funding, so they give you the tuition dollars, and they also provide advocacy to medical programs to accept the international applicants. These programs vary a little in how students complete the MD PhD program. However, a typical setup is that students accepted into the MD PhD program will spend their first 2 years predominantly taking medical school courses. After the first 2 years, they will then switch and start completing their PhD work. They'll basically kind of put medical school on pause and then go over to the research area and complete their PhD work. That PhD work typically takes between 3 and 4 years. Then after they've completed most of their doctoral research work, The student will then re-engage in the medical school portion, typically during the clinical years, and then complete both. They would end up graduating at the same time with both their MD degree and their PhD. Obviously, for this route, students need to be academically strong and have a very strong interest in research. But research isn't necessarily for everyone. And so some students take another alternative pathway, and this is through taking glide or gap years. You may already be familiar with the term. Instead of being from secondary school to university, instead this time we're taking the gap years between university and medical school. And during this time, students are able to remain in the United States and pursue other interests. These usually involve employment in order to keep the visa active, but usually students typically take employment in some field related to the sciences. During this time, students are able to hone their skills, increase their healthcare experiences, and a lot of students will actually apply for permanent residency or US citizenship. Taking glide years is becoming increasingly common, not only for international students, but domestic students as well. In fact, the majority of incoming medical students typically have 1 to 2 years of gap time between completing their bachelor's degree and when they go ahead and begin medical training. Another alternative pathway is non-US medical schools. Depending on the student and their goals, it is possible for students to become physicians by attending a medical school outside of the United States. There are many US-style medical programs around the world that train physicians with the same high-quality standards as here in the United States. Some students are able to then obtain residencies in the United States, while others decide to practice somewhere else in the world or even back in their home countries. One very popular option is UK medical schools. Now, the medical schools in the United Kingdom run a little bit differently than the traditional US model. In the United Kingdom, most students typically go on to medical school after completing secondary education. So there's actually no bachelor's degree involved. However, there are programs in the UK for graduate entry that allow students who study in the US or any other country and earn a bachelor's degree to kind of jump into the medical school curriculum in the UK. Each year, students are able to, when students apply to UK medical schools, they're only allowed to apply to 5 schools per year. And each school differs slightly on which entrance exam they may require. Most schools do require the UCAT in the United Kingdom, which is less of a subjective test and tests the student more on how they think, how they speak, how they write, and their decision making. It's often referred to as a situational judgment test. Other schools will also ask for a more specific subjective test, which is going to test the subjects like biology and chemistry and biochemistry. These usually come in the form of the BMAT or the GMA SAT, and it varies between schools which test exam that they'll accept. The BMAT and the GAM SAT are very similar to the MCAT in the United States. Another alternative pathway that students can consider is outside of the medical school box. There are a wide variety of career paths that are related to medicine that are much more international friendly in their acceptances. So depending on the student's interests and goals, there may be a career path that suits them that doesn't necessarily have the acceptance barriers that medicine does. Dentistry, for example, is more international friendly than medicine, as it does not have a residency requirement following after dental school. However, some dental schools do have financial requirements of payment upfront. Pharmacy schools, nursing programs, and podiatry schools are also incredibly international friendly and still provide students with an avenue to have a healthcare career that is just as rewarding as a career in medicine. And I'm going to highlight a few of these in the next couple of slides. So for dentistry, Currently, we have about 6,100 seats in dental schools in the United States. We do have an international enrollment of about a little over 4%. It varies between 4 to 5% every year. The mean GPAs required for dentistry are slightly lower than medicine, and they take an exam called the DAT, the Dental Aptitude Test. It requires, again, 4 years of study, very similar to medicine, and there are 10 different specialty areas that students can pursue. And those range in areas from just general practice to orthodontics to oral and maxillofacial surgery, pediatrics, radiology, oral pathology. So there's lots of different things that students can go into if they choose to. Dentists can practice in the United States after 4 years of dental school. You can, if you're just going into general practice. If you want to go into something more specialized, there would be additional years of dental school after that to get those specific specialties under your belt. Another excellent option for international students to consider is optometry. Optometry specializes in diseases of vision and the eye. Optometrists form close relationships with patients, usually following them throughout their lives. Optometry schools have a high overall acceptance rate of over 70%. And they provide the opportunity for students to, also similar to dentistry, have independent business ownership after graduation. Students can elect to specialize in a variety of areas and can even perform eye surgery in some parts of the United States. Pharmacists are quickly expanding their role in healthcare and are becoming very involved, particularly in primary care in some areas of the United States. Pharmacists are sometimes the frontline healthcare providers for patients that can assist with diagnosis and even provide vaccinations to the public. And so pharmacy is definitely a growing area, and it is incredibly international friendly. Another option for students that I want to highlight is podiatry. Podiatrists are physicians who specialize in the foot and ankle. They work with a variety of patients, from young children all the way up to our senior citizens. They even perform surgery and are closely tied to hospitals. And so this is a great alternative for students who are interested in surgery or sort of in sports medicine or orthopedics. So how do students then prepare for professional school? So most pre-health programs follow a similar path for preparation, very similar academic coursework requirements, very similar sort of extracurricular involvements. So what are some of the things that students do to help prepare them and help them make them stand out? So they come down to two different categories. The first is academics. Students need to be strong academically. They need to do well in their courses and earn a high GPA. This is even more true for international applicants to US medical schools. The typical cumulative GPA for an accepted international student is currently about a 3.85 on a 4.0 scale. They also tend to score in the 90th percentile or better on the MCAT exam. In addition to efforts in the classroom, competitive international applicants tend to be heavily involved in research efforts during their undergraduate careers. And this goes back to that sort of MD, PhD track for students. Even if an international student doesn't intend to pursue an MD, PhD, they need to prepare in a similar manner. Additionally, students need to demonstrate some of the core competencies of healthcare. These include excellent interpersonal skills. So how do you, your service, your social awareness, cultural appreciation, how do you work with other people? Intrapersonal skills, so this comes down to your ethics, your resilience, and your adaptability. And then thinking and reasoning skills. So how do you attack a problem? How do you do problem solving and think critically about various issues facing healthcare and even personal struggles? These things are demonstrated through involvement within your local community and campus involvement, in addition to sort of your classroom activities. I'm often asked what the best major is for a pre-med student. To be honest, the answer is any major you enjoy. Yes, many pre-med students are major in biology. However, medicine is more than just biology, and medical schools look for students that come from a wide variety of backgrounds. I encourage all of my students to major in something they enjoy and something they want to learn more about. Many majors provide flexibility for students to complete the prerequisite coursework for medical school. Even a history major can take biochemistry. By finding a major that you enjoy, you will be more successful and you will enjoy your college experience that much more. So take the time to explore your interests and find a major that speaks to you. So let me jump back then to those core competencies that I mentioned before. How do you demonstrate those sort of softer skills to in your medical school application? And this is done through telling your story. Medical schools want to know who their applicants are as human beings. They can look at a transcript and know how you are as a student, but they want to know what's behind those grades and sort of what are the things that are motivating you towards a career in medicine. And you do this by telling your story. You have ample opportunity in the application to show medical schools who you are through a wide variety of the requirements. You gain the competencies needed through extracurricular engagement, and you let medical schools know about that through essays you write, both in the primary and the secondary applications, through your personal statement. Others will comment on your abilities around the core competencies because you need to request a variety of letters of recommendation. And these will come from faculty or community members that you've interacted with. And again, hopefully you get to interview with medical schools and you can demonstrate your personality and tell your story to faculty at the medical school and admissions counselors. Students need to be confident in their stories and demonstrate why they do the things they do and what motivates them for a career in medicine. Medical schools are not interested in robots. They want students who have reflected on their experiences and don't just do things to look good on their resumes. They want students who want to serve others because they have a whole heart to do that and not because they think it will just look good. So what does this all look like in the end? When students start university in the United States, they're usually very excited about the prospect of becoming a physician. And this process is very overwhelming and has a lot of moving parts. This is where people like me come into play. In the first and second year of undergraduate education, this is when I encourage students to focus on cultivating their story. Find activities and organizations to become involved with both on campus and within the community that they're interested in. So if a student wants to be a pediatrician and work with children, I encourage them to get involved within the local town that their college or university is in and get involved with children's activities, whether it's at doing tutoring at a community center, or if you have an interest in sports and like to play football, for example, become a youth coach for a football team and get experience being around children and especially their parents. We also begin working on making sure that students set up a solid academic foundation in their first 2 years. During the third and fourth year of undergraduate education is when we really start to get into the nitty gritty of the application. And I sort of laid out a little timeline here for you to kind of show you all the steps involved. And this is designed as if the student is planning to start medical school immediately after graduation from university. This is a multi-step process for students, and it typically takes about 2 years to complete that application. I also remind students this is not a marathon, this is a marathon and not a sprint. You will be completing a lot of things over a long period of time, and you can't be rushed, and students need to take their time with this. So in summary, international students do face unique challenges when it comes to medical education in the United States. Not to say they cannot be overcome, but students need to be aware of these challenges so that they can make a plan to overcome. Students need to make a plan for the financial piece. They need to be open and honest with their families about the costs involved. International students also need to be aware that gaining acceptance into US medical school is going to be an uphill battle. They need to prepare themselves academically, personally, and professionally to make themselves stand out and be noticed. Students also need to know that there are alternative career paths. They can still be a doctor if the title is that important to them. They would just specialize in something else, teeth, eyes, feet, or other things. These healthcare related fields are much more open to international applicants, and if the student is open to learning, it can open up a whole new world for them. However, those fields aren't for everyone. For some, medicine is the only path for them. For those students, the onus is on you to become the best candidate for medical school that you can be. You need to set yourself up for success both inside and outside the classroom, and get involved within the community, both your on-campus community, both at home when you go home for breaks, and in the town or city that your university is located in. That you need to advocate for yourself to get the opportunities that you need to be successful. And remember, this is a long journey. Reach out to the resources available to you, your family, tutoring centers on campus if you start to struggle academically, advisors, faculty advisors, research advisors. Most institutions also have a pre-health office that has advisors there to help you. Planning is going to be key. Think ahead about what you are going to face and make a plan for how you can get through it. This may be a little bit bumpy along the way than some of your domestic counterparts, but if you put a plan together and you execute it in the right way, you can do it. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed sharing some of this information with you. So I'll take a second to look at the chat and the Q&A. There is my email address. So it's huntp@juniata.edu, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Patricia, ma'am. You have covered almost everything in the presentation. It was a great session, and I'm sure it would have benefited all the participants who are watching this right now, who are taking part. So you have shared your mail ID also. So the answer, like the questions that there are a lot of questions coming up on the Q&A feature. If there are any questions that we can take up during the session, please feel free to reach out to Patricia, ma'am, through her mail ID. So, ma'am, there are a few questions we have over here. Is MCAT the only test? Attendee has asked, is MCAT the only test you would need to take for medical studies?
Yes. So in the United States, the MCAT is required by I think I only know of one medical school that will look at an SAT score if an MCAT score is not available. I have a feeling that was a COVID change, but I think they're sort of keeping the language. But for every other medical school, yes, an MCAT is required in most cases.
All right. Moving on to the next question, ma'am. How would you recommend that students prepare? Is there a particular syllabus that they have to follow, or do they just need to study what they're planning to specialize in?
Yeah, so I encourage students whenever they start university to reach out to their advisors. There is a specific set of prerequisite courses that students typically take. It involves some biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, some social sciences, some English composition courses, and there's a specific set. Each school has little nuances though. So for example, the State University of New York Medical School requires a literature course. It's unique to them. And so there are some things that students can look up. The schools are very open about what their prerequisite courses are. And if a student works with their academic advisor and or pre-health advisor, they will set them up with exactly what they need to know for where the particular medical schools that they're most interested in.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, you mentioned about some courses which students can take up other than medicine. When it comes to degrees which are the degrees that are available to students in the medical field itself if they are looking at undergrad studies?
Mhm. Probably, I would, a vast majority of pre-medical students do major in biology, chemistry, or biochemistry. Those three areas probably is 3/4 of the students who end up matriculating to medical school. However, I've worked with students who are history majors, philosophy majors, and even education majors who have decided that they want to pursue medical school, but they also have these other interests. And in fact, one of my students last year was a history major, and he was accepted to 6 different medical schools. And so he got to really choose where he wanted to go because he had lots of options. Not to say that he's the norm, he's not the norm. But I tell students, major in something that interests you. If you're interested in the brain and how people behave, maybe psychology is more appropriate for you. If you're really interested in like immunology and viruses and bacteria, maybe majoring in microbiology is a better fit for you than a traditional biology program. A lot of my pre-meds, they come in and they're like, I want to study biology. And I'm like, okay. And then we get to that plant science ecology requirement. And they're like, but I don't want to take ecology. Like, I don't care about plants. Well, biology is the study of all living things. So in order for you to have a biology major, you're going to have to take courses in evolution and ecology and plant science and maybe fisheries and or an aviary class or something like that. So, students have to be open to everything that their major entails. And if it's not right for you, then find something that is right for you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With that, we come to the end of the session. Thanks for taking up these many questions and almost covering everything that we were looking forward to. Ma'am, could you please share your mail ID on the chat so that students can reach out to you if they have any more doubts and queries? Also, ma'am, before we close the session, any final piece of advice you would like to give to our students, to our aspiring medical students?
Mm-hmm. I think the best piece of advice is to be reflective about who you are and what you want out of your university education. You can get to where you want to be.
It's a great piece of advice, ma'am.
It's short and sweet.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, one more question. I think a question suddenly popped up. The last question for the day. Is it possible to do a double majors in a medical college?
Yes. So that's going to depend on your college or university. At my institution, it's very easy for students to double major because our academic programs provide a lot of flexibility to students. Other institutions may have more prescriptive type majors where they dictate a lot more of the course requirements for you, and you may not have as much flexibility. So it's really going to vary from university to university.
Great, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. So please feel free to reach out to ma'am if you have any more doubts. And ma'am, please share your mail ID with our students who are a part of this webinar series. And once again, thank you so much. And it's time for us to start the next session. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar series.
Thank you.